let's analyze this. So, Cultaholic, prominent wrestling YouTube channel. Its core members had split from What Culture Wrestling, the more prominent YouTube wrestling channels out there, and broke into their own excuse me, let me start over. They broke out of What Culture. They departed from that channel, from that brand. I would say it's been about a year and a half, I believe. It's been about a year and a half since they broke away from the What Culture brand and founded this Cultaholic brand new channel that is very similar to what they would do and the formula and format of What Culture. So they recently, a couple of days ago to be exact, did a retrospective, a career retrospective for The Undertaker. The Undertaker, former 7-time world champion, used to have the 21-0 WrestleMania winning streak. I believe he's 23-2 now. I want to say he's 23-2 now because he lost to Roman at 33 and he lost to Brock at 30. And since then, he has beaten Bray Wyatt. Actually, he's 24-2 now. He's beaten Bray Wyatt, Shane McMahon, and John Cena last year. He is, without a shadow of doubt, an all-time great, not just in the history of the WWE, but also professional wrestling as a whole. He was a guy that held the locker room together through the company's ups and downs. A lot of people refer to him as this generation's Andre the Giant, in terms of being a locker room leader, in terms of being that alpha personality, having that alpha mentality, and he is well respected. I would go as far to say that it's debatable who I respect more between him and Shawn Michaels. I consider Shawn Michaels the greatest professional wrestler of all time, but The Undertaker is the greatest locker room leader, the greatest presence, the greatest alpha in the history of professional wrestling. So they're going to give a retrospective on his career through his ups and downs, which he's had many, and also the longevity, and hopefully they'll cover some of the injuries that he suffered, because those are very much needed to be discussed as well, because he's almost had damn near the same amount of injuries that Mick Foley has had. Not quite as much, but close. So let's see what they have to say.
For nearly 3 decades, The Undertaker has cast an enormous shadow over the WWE landscape, presiding at different times as it's Frankenstein's monster, it's Batman, it's Satan incarnate, and it's Clint Eastwood, and sometimes a combination of those 4.
No doubt. Agreed. Like a real-life Batman.
No professional wrestler in history has ever had such a continuous presence in McMahon-centric sports entertainment quite like the ever-present Phenom. Nor will any other wrestler likely match up to his awe-inspiring longevity. In this brand new Cultaholic installment, we'll be taking a look back at the lengthy career of one of professional wrestling's most famed and accomplished icons.
A longevity that's gone on a little bit too fucking long. Let's be real here.
And with WrestleMania on the horizon, who better to begin with than the man behind the streak and the most indomitable performer of all.
Seems like he has no match for WrestleMania, by the way, which that could obviously change, but they have 2 months, but still, it's very strange that the match has no build to it yet. Me personally, I'm hoping he doesn't have a match at WrestleMania, but he just might.
All time, The Undertaker. Before donning the black duster and brimmed hat, Mark Calloway had humbler beginnings in the sport, starting his wrestling career in 1984. A former college basketball center at Texas Wesleyan University in the mid-80s, Calloway dropped out to pursue wrestling with more regularity. A protege of gifted heavyweight Don the Spoiler Jardine, Calloway would adopt one of Jardine's signatures, the rope walk, or old school as we would later know it, into his wrestling repertoire. Throughout much of the late 80s, Calloway plied his trade under such names as the Master of Pain and Texas Red, in places like Jerry Lawler's USWA and the Von Erich's World Class promotion. As the 80s drew to a close, Calloway would gain national clearance in WCW, adopting the name Mean Mark Callis. As Callis, Calloway replaced an injured Sid Vicious in the tag team The Skyscrapers, teaming with fellow menacing giant Dangerous Dan Spivey. Mean Mark Callis and Dangerous Dan Spivey, how very golden age of wrestling. The Skyscrapers team was relatively short-lived, and after a tour of New Japan in 1990, where he performed under the name Punisher Dice Morgan, Callis returned to WCW as a singles performer. He would have some high-profile matches with the likes of Brian Pillman, Johnny Ace, and then United States champion Lex Luger, prior to a meeting with Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard shortly before SummerSlam 1990. Although he would tape his first matches for television shortly before Survivor Series 1990, the Thanksgiving night pay-per-view is what's accepted as the official debut of The Undertaker. There he was foisted onto an astonishing...
Yeah, he had done a few, he'd done a couple of, not house shows, but Superstars tapings. He had done Superstars tapings in advance prior to Survivor Series. And what's crazy is that, and most people tend to forget about this, but when Undertaker made his debut at Survivor Series, Gorilla Monsoon made the accidental mistake, the infamous accidental mistake that people tend to forget about, of naming Undertaker's move the Tombstone Piledriver when he did it. Because it was like, wait a minute, how you know what that move is called? We haven't seen him yet, you know. But like I said, prior to Survivor Series, Gorilla had already called Undertaker matches in Superstars tapings that were prior to Survivor Series, even though the Superstars tapings wouldn't air till after Survivor Series. So he made that little mistake. And some people, I've heard a lot of other pundits mention that, but some don't when they talk about Undertaker's debut. That's just a little footnote. They probably will mention this literally right after I play it. But just in case they don't mention it, that's a little fun fact.
Audience as a mystery partner on Ted DiBiase's team. Fans watched in awe as this unblinking brute slowly stalked opponents, delivering relentless strikes and demonstrating mesmerizing agility. Although he was a chilling villain managed by the unlikable brother Love shortly before being handed off to a more fitting ally in Paul Bearer, fans found it difficult at times to boo The Undertaker because he was simply unlike anything they'd seen before. Throughout 91, his unyielding path of destruction would only continue to unfold. It was on his 26th birthday, March 24th, 1991, when The Undertaker began his now legendary WrestleMania streak, annihilating the veteran Superfly Jimmy Snuka in a matter of minutes.
Who was already past his prime at that point. I believe that Jimmy Snuka was either 47 or 48. He was almost 50. And what's even more crazy is that people forget that he was the first, I believe, yeah, he was the first ECW World Heavyweight Champion. But it was back when they were still known as Eastern Championship Wrestling. That was when Todd Gordon was the owner and promoter before Paul Heyman took over. Because Paul Heyman was still in WCW as Paulie Dangerously.
The aura of invincibility was fleshed out with each ensuing victory, and shortly afterwards, Undertaker moved on to bigger stars. The Ultimate Warrior was his next high-profile nemesis, getting locked inside an airtight coffin at the end of one particular attack. When Warrior was then fired from WWE that August,
the Warrior feud was pretty good. It wasn't that bad.
Undertaker assisted Jake Roberts in gate-crashing Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth's wedding reception uninvited, violently marring the end of the ceremony. But it wouldn't take long for Undertaker to ascend to meet the promotion's very biggest stars. 1 year after his debut at the 1991 Survivor Series, Undertaker would defeat WWF champion Hulk Hogan in a match dubbed the Gravest Challenge, thanks to an assist from Ric Flair, that dastardly Ric Flair. The controversy led to a rematch 6 nights later in...
Now, that tombstone onto the chair spot with Hogan was just stupid. It wasn't stupid because it was done as part of the finish. No, it was stupid because Hogan, and probably he's still probably lying about it to this day, that Hogan, he claims that he suffered a neck injury from the tombstone power driver onto the chair spot. If you go back and watch that match and look at that finish, Hogan's head comes nowhere near touching the chair. So how the hell did you mess up your neck? But we all know that Hogan has been well known, more than well known, to lie. So, a lot of times he lies for no reason. Talking about I was almost a part of Metallica. Man.
San Antonio, in which Hogan regained the belt, also via a contestable finish. As far as the original Survivor Series match went, more important than winning the gold for Undertaker was the crowd response he received. While Hogan was beginning to get a bit old hat in '91, and also tarnished by scandal, there was no denying that Undertaker was one of the coolest and most captivating figures in all of wrestling. In response to his enormous popularity, The Undertaker was turned babyface less than 2 months before WrestleMania 8. This was a result of him preventing Jake...
One thing they didn't mention, just in case you didn't know, Undertaker didn't hold the WWF title long when he won it the first time. I believe he only held it for 6 days, because 6 days later, and this is something that the guy didn't mention. His name is Jack, right? It's Jack the Jobber. This is Jack the Jobber talking. Correct me if I'm wrong down below if this is Jack the Jobber. I'm pretty sure this is Jack the Jobber talking. Anyway, Jack forgot to mention that this Tuesday in Texas, which I'm not going to get into detail about that pay-per-view. It was ridiculous. But this Tuesday in Texas is when Undertaker dropped the title back to Hogan. Not dropped it. Did he drop it? Yeah, he dropped it back to Hogan. It was due to controversy, and the title ended up being vacated. Hogan was stripped. And Royal Rumble 92... they decide who's going to be the next WWF champion in the Royal Rumble match itself. The rest is history. Ric Flair won it, and we all know what went down from there.
Roberts from trying to attack Miss Elizabeth with a steel chair. What a chivalrous good guy. Though Undertaker was still an unfathomable creature seemingly beyond humanity, it seemed he possessed something of a moral compass and was quick to rescue the damsel in distress. This led to Undertaker driving Roberts out of the WWF at the aforementioned WrestleMania, tombstoning him onto the floor outside the ring before a little anticlimactically rolling him back inside for an easy pinfall. Going forward, Undertaker essentially filled the role that Andre the Giant had held throughout his career, the babyface attraction that is both a wonder and a bit of an oddity at the same time. With this role, though, came a double-edged sword. Undertaker would be presented as virtually unbeatable, but his list of opponents was little more than a collection of limited monsters and giants. Kamala...
Not to mention, it took almost 6 years before he got the WWF title back. And in between, within those 6 years, I believe he had gotten some opportunities at the IC strap, but obviously never won it. And to this day, he still has never won the Intercontinental title or the US title. So that 6 year period was really weird because he was in a lot of, I don't want to say random feuds, but kind of unnecessary feuds. He wasn't really feuding with any top stars. He was just feuding with giant after giant after giant after big man after big man after big man after big man. I'd like to think that his best feud within that 6 year period, before the feud with Bret Hart, which wasn't even really a feud, but before, his little feud with Bret Hart, his little program with Bret, I like to think that his best feud up until that point was with Yokozuna. And he was the only top guy, legit top guy, that Undertaker feuded with that kind of made sense. With everybody else, it was just, I'm big, or I'm bigger than Undertaker, and I want to take over the position that he holds for the company, for the WWF, as being this unbeatable, intimidating giant monster. That's all it felt like. The Giant Gonzalez feud was trash. The Kamala feud was trash. The King Kong Bundy feud with scratch that. The whole $1 Million Corporation feud was trash. Okay. Yeah, Undertaker had to take a lot of plates of shit in terms of feuds. And no disrespect to Kamala. Kamala is under the radar in terms of how much of a good personality, I would say. Not really good wrestler, but a good personality that he was for his career. But, I mean, those guys, like, if you have a wrestling company and you're booking and you're, you know, part of the part of management or part of the, you know, quote unquote booking committee, in order for you to want to have Undertaker look strong and really be a solid presence and really be top of the mid card, main eventer, the last thing you would want to do is put him in the feuds that he was in between 92 and 95, or 96 rather, or really between 91 and 96. Like a lot of these feuds that he ended up being in, you wouldn't want to put him in those feuds if you really wanted to make him a top star. It's just that Undertaker was so good at what he got. He did well enough with what he had, and he was just willing to take what he was given and try to make the best out of it so well to the point where the company couldn't ignore him any longer. And it's like, you got to make him champion again, or at least have him hover around the main event. At least that's how I feel that the perspective of it all was.
Giant Gonzalez, Mr. Hughes, and others would fill Undertaker's match portfolio throughout 92 and 93.
Oh, God. Main event of the first ever Monday Night Raw. Undertaker versus goddamn Damien Demento.
They kept the Phenom strong, but it was outside of the main event. However, his chance of winning a second world
My point exactly.
title would come along very soon. On January 22nd, 1994, at the Royal Rumble, The Undertaker died, sort of. In his attempt to defeat WWF champion Yokozuna in a casket match, Undertaker was attacked by a ludicrous number of heels, about 10 or 12 heels. His urn was then unsealed, releasing the
That was literally almost half of the roster.
source of his apparent omnipotence. After delivering some sort of strange post-mortem monologue on the Titantron before ascending up to heaven or something, Mark Calloway would then vanish for 7 months, being replaced...
Little known fact, the Undertaker that ascended, because you can't have you can't have the same guy, one appear in the casket and then appear ascending up. Like, you know that's not Mark. You know both of them are not Mark Calloway. So, little known fact, the Undertaker that was ascending up to the rafters when they did that segment was Marty Jannetty, I believe. Yes, it was Marty Jannetty. Not many people know that, but it was Marty Jannetty. I don't remember how I found out. It was some shoot interview I heard from somebody. It was a while ago. It was something like 2-3 years ago that I found this out. Because I didn't even know that it was Marty Jannetty this entire time. But yes, it was him.
By a Ted DiBiase endorsed imposter, fake Undertaker, played by primetime Brian Lee. At SummerSlam 94,
which it's alleged that's Undertaker's cousin, Mark Calloway's cousin. I'm not sure if that's true. One of you peeps can correct me down below, but I think that's his cousin, like blood cousin.
For the real Undertaker re-emerged, with purple replacing the grey in his colour scheme. How fancy. There, he dispatched the Underfaker once and for all. Upon his return, Undertaker would gain revenge at Survivor Series, before spending most of 1995 battling the $1 Million Corporation, beating IRS, King Kong Bundy, and Kama at 3
terrible feud.
Different pay-per-views. He would also gain revenge on King Mabel, who had legitimately broken Undertaker's eye socket with an errant blow by conquering him in a casket match to close out 1995.
Jack, just say it, man. Mabel sat on Taker's face. No homo. He sat on Taker's face. he sat on Taker's face. That's what happened. Sat on his face, and I believe broke his orbital bone, which is on his nose, like the bridge of his nose. Which that was the first of 2 broken orbital bones. The second one was from Rey Mysterio at Royal Rumble 2010 when Rey did that senton. But yeah, Mabel sat on the man's face. Let's call it what it is here.
From there, Undertaker returned to the main event scene, turning his attention to Diesel after Kevin Nash screwed him over in a WWF title match against Bret Hart at the '96 Royal Rumble. Diesel would then become the streak's 5th victim at WrestleMania 12. But
underrated WrestleMania match, underrated streak match, just overall underrated Undertaker match. Him and Kevin Nash, or Diesel I should say, was really good. It was better than most people expected it to be. Better than I expected it to be. The only problem, literally the only problem I have with that match is that it went on too long. I believe the match was, I want to say 20, maybe 23 minutes, something like that. That's too long. The match should have been no more than about 15, I'd say 12 to 15 minutes. It was really good, but it got to a point where, and you could kind of see towards the end of the match, where they almost didn't really know what to do anymore. So they kind of just, I don't want to say, both Taker and Nash kind of seemed lost towards the end of the match, because they had done everything that they wanted to do in the match early on. So by the time you got to the end, it just felt like, okay, like, what is happening? Why hasn't this match ended yet? But really good match nonetheless. I would say that was the first really good match of Undertaker's streak at WrestleMania. And you could argue that up to that point, that was, not even argue, you could say that was his best Mania match at that point in his career.
At this point, it's fair to say that Undertaker hadn't really gotten to show what he could do inside the ring as a versatile performer, but his next foe would get the very best work out of him so far, and arguably ever. That man was Mick Foley. Once Cactus Jack donned the leather mask of Mankind, the two remorseless maulers set about destroying each other as much as the sets around them, as boiler room brawls and buried alive matches helped usher in a more chaotic WWF.
By the summer of '96 to about early '97, that had been Undertaker's best feud. He had arguably his best matches. At that point, I'm not saying right now, but at that point he had his best matches of his career against Foley, against Mankind, no doubt.
Also ushered in were slight costume changes for The Undertaker, who began to appear a little more medieval goth than Old West mortician.
Just real quick, before Jack continues, I did not like the teardrop on Undertaker's cheek. And thankfully, it didn't last long. But let me explain why. And once again, people don't talk about this, but if you live in America, you know that most guys, just really pertaining to guys, I'm not sure about women. I don't know how women handle themselves, but when it comes to guys who have been in prison or are part of a gang, mainly when they're in prison, this happens. They come out with a teardrop on their face, a teardrop tattoo on their face. I forgot what it means. I forgot exactly what it means, but I know that it's not necessarily a good thing to have a teardrop tatted on your face. It's mainly reserved for men who have been in prison, especially either men who are in a gang or who are in a gang and served time in prison. One or the other or both, I don't know. But I know it is something to that degree. So that's why I didn't like Undertaker's teardrop tattoo. It's the first time I saw it, I thought to myself, was Undertaker in prison? Like, did he do time? When was that? And how come I didn't know about it?
That feud with Mankind gave Undertaker a handful of acclaim-worthy performances, while also costing him Paul Bearer, who had turned on him in order to align with Mankind at SummerSlam 96. This more human and likeable Undertaker would end up main eventing WrestleMania 13 in slightly roundabout. That's right, Austin and Hart were on the undercard. What happened? However, it was good news for Taker, who would...
Can I say something? I'm going to say this real quick before Jack continues. Bret and Austin, WrestleMania 13, the submission match. I understand that back then, it was one of the greatest WrestleMania matches of all time. That should have been the main event. But all these years later, the more I rewatch that match, the more I say, it's still a really good match, but it's not great. I thought their Survivor Series match was better. I might be in the minority here, but I thought that their Survivor Series 96 match was better. Maybe that's just me. I might be the only one that believes that, but I kind of feel like their WrestleMania 13 match is a little bit overrated at this point. Like, to me, saying that Bret and Austin at WrestleMania 13 is top 5 or top 3 greatest WrestleMania matches of all time, to say that now in 2019, to me is almost as ridiculous as still saying that Randy Savage and Ricky Steamboat at WrestleMania 3 is one of the top 5, top 3 greatest WrestleMania matches of all time. Like, to me, that's bullshit. Because there have been a shitload of matches that have been better now. That's just me. But like I said, no disrespect to Bret and Austin from 13. I thought it was a really good match, even though, in my view, I thought their Survivor Series match was better. But in terms of the impact that match had, that their WrestleMania match had, it very much still holds up. Because without that match, there are a lot of things that you don't get. There are a lot of directions that the WWF ends up going that they wouldn't go had they not had that match. But it's not as great anymore as people still claim it to be. Now, at that time, yes, all-time classic. Is it an all-time classic now? No. It's still a really good match, though.
Capture his second world championship in a victory over Psycho Sid. His reign would last over...
And Sid shit his pants, too, by the way.
4 months, and to be fair, it didn't really represent the most memorable of points in Undertaker's career. Despite being champion, usually the dead man would play second fiddle to Steve Austin's hell-raising, Bret Hart's pro-Canadian rhetoric, or Shawn Michaels' unapologetic edginess. It was in a feud with HBK after dropping the belt to Bret Hart that Undertaker helped usher in Hell in a Cell matches, bloodying Michaels into oblivion in one of WWE's greatest and most fondly remembered matches of all time. And that match would also spawn a huge part of Undertaker's legacy, his evil brother Kane. Glenn Jacobs stormed the cell in the closing minutes of the match, confronting the disbelieving brother who had assumed that Kane had perished years earlier. The conflict between the half-siblings would be revisited many times over the coming years, but it was at its most compelling in early '98.
It was at its best in 98. It was only good in 98. All other feuds that... And I talked about this when I covered Kane, when I covered Kane's possible retirement video that I did a few weeks back. Their feud was only good and great in 98. Anytime they feuded afterwards, worse and worse and worse. And their matches got worse and worse and worse.
Undertaker survived a fiery attempt on his life at the Royal Rumble before finally accepting Kane's challenge. Undertaker would barely vanquish him at WrestleMania 14 before defeating Kane in the first ever Inferno match the following month. And if Human Barbecue wasn't enough murderous mayhem, Undertaker would top it all at the 1998 King of the Ring when he sent Mankind falling to his near death from Hell in a Cell not once, but twice. Nobody will ever forget Mick Foley's plummeted brushes with death, nor his painful landings on thumbtacks as Undertaker's resolute swathe of destruction continued unchallenged. He would meet Steve Austin for WWF Gold at SummerSlam 98, the culmination of the Highway to Hell, only to fall just short. By this period, Undertaker actually began aligning himself more closely with Kane while embracing the villainous path that he'd once walked. But what could WWF do to really turn Undertaker fully heel? Well, enter the Ministry of Darkness. In this period, The Undertaker was presented as a looming demonic presence, the unquestioned leader of a cult-like faction that participated.
Let me say this before he continues. Undertaker should have taken time off after SummerSlam 98. Let me explain why, real quick. I will go in depth about this in another video, but for right now, I'm going to say it for this one. By the summer of 98, particularly in August, Undertaker was beaten up. He had suffered a few injuries, and through those injuries, he had never really taken an extended amount of time off. When he wrestled Mankind at King of the Ring in 98 in the Hell in a Cell, Undertaker worked that match with, I believe, a broken foot. Either a broken ankle or a broken foot. Undertaker was beat up at that point. He had been going full-time for years, and like I said, he had never really taken any real time off. I believe the most amount of time off he had taken was maybe 4 to 5 months. Which, you know, if someone were to take that much time off now, it would seem like an eternity. But back then, it was like, just if you look at it in the grand scheme of things, it's not an insane amount of time off, 4 to 5 months. So Undertaker should have taken time off. And, you know, some people would say, oh, but they really needed him because the Attitude Era was in full effect, it was at its peak. To which I say, no, they did not need him. They had Austin, they had Triple H, they had Rock, they had Foley still, they had Kane, they had DX. You know, they had all of those guys. They had the Brood, they had the Hardys. The Hardys were coming in. Edge and Christian were starting to come in. You know, so they were fine. Like, they were not going to lose money not having Taker on television for a few months. They weren't going to lose a damn thing. You know, people talk about how he missed WrestleMania 2000, which he did. But in my view, he should have missed WrestleMania 15. Especially looking back now, seeing that him and Boss Man inside the cell was a shit show. And it was literally the shortest, still is the shortest Hell in a Cell match of all time. And it was really bad. He should have missed 15, not 16. And people, you know, gloss over the fact that Undertaker started getting fat during his Ministry days. Look, before you jump at me, I'm going to say this real quick. I'm not fat shaming, okay? It's not, to me, it's not a bad thing to be fat. If it calls for it, then that's fine. If you are naturally, genetically exposed to being fat or being heavy set or being wide or big or whatever you want to call it, then that's fine. Samoans usually suffer from that. You know, that biological thing of being big, whether it be fat and wide or very, very muscular and tall. So I'm not fat shaming, but I'm saying Undertaker was fat. He was a fat bastard during the Ministry days. And because of that, he couldn't do much because of not just being a little overweight, but also still being hurt. He was working through injuries for a long time before he finally took that time off from late 99 up until about the spring of 2000. When he finally took that time off, when he had the, I believe he had a tricep or bicep tear. It was something like that. And because of that, he ended up taking finally an extended period of time off, and then when he came back, he was the American Badass. But my point is that after the match with Austin from SummerSlam 98, because you still need to have that match, and it was really good, and it fit, and it made sense, and it was just the right thing to do. After that match, Taker should have taken time off, and he shouldn't have came back until, I would say, after WrestleMania 15. So he would have taken something like 9 months off, 8 to 9 months off. I'd say stretch it out to 10. Don't have him come back till the summer of 99. And if you still want to do the ministry stuff, then fine. But you could still find a way to pick it up from there on, instead of starting it in the fall of 98 like they actually did. And also another thing to note, that because of him being overweight and breaking down, he left a lot of great matches that he should have had on the table. And I mentioned this in some YouTuber's video. I believe it was ITN. He had done a video on Shawn Michaels' top 5 biggest wins, and somebody, a lot of people were saying, oh, Shawn Michaels, the GOAT, the GOAT, the GOAT. They were just writing that in the comment section. And somebody said, what about Undertaker? And I explained to him why I felt that Undertaker is not the GOAT. And this was the explanation that I gave him. Because of the ministry days and how he left a lot of great matches that should have been done, that could have been done on the table, because of wear and tear, being hurt, and being overweight. Undertaker was fat. He had a belly, okay? We can't ignore that. The man had a belly.
Participated in sacrificial rites, mock crucifixions, abductions, and other rituals with an occult motif. Strangely, the ministry would then soon merge with a Shane McMahon-led...
That picture right there, you can see his guts sticking out.
...corporation, giving us the corporate ministry. Remember that very weird remix theme tune? After the group met with...
Corporate ministry was terrible. That shouldn't have happened. Unnecessary. Oh wait, Vince, it's me. It was me, Austin. It was me all along. I'm not gonna say it the way Vince said it. I don't want to hurt my throat tonight.
In a fairly fast end, spoilers, it was Vince McMahon all along, Undertaker partnered with The Big Show, slowly shedding his gothic accessories and underworld aura in favour of playing something a bit closer to his real-life persona. Despite coming in as an undead zombie, we were starting to see shades of Mark Calloway, the Texas-bred biker who doesn't need graveyard terror in order to intimidate his opponents. However, Undertaker's true introduction as the American Badass came at Judgment Day 2000, storming the ring on 2 wheels of fury, Kid Rock blaring through the arena. It was more badass.
Good lord, that is the fuck?
At the time. This was in 2000, don't worry about it. For the next year and a half, The Undertaker spoke threateningly about what he would do to the intruders upon his yard, most of which would entail a blood-soaked beating and an emphatic last ride powerbomb, his new finisher. Later, as Kid Rock gave way to Limp Bizkit, Undertaker continued to remain relevant, feuding with Triple H and Steve Austin in high-profile matches, while also standing alongside Kane in perhaps the strongest incarnation of the Brothers of Destruction. But then, in an unexpected twist at the end of 2001, The Undertaker turned heel once again, humiliating Jim Ross at the altar of Vince McMahon without any reason or provocation. This turn, along with a haircut, brought out an emotionless bully side of The Undertaker. It was a sort of combination of Biker Taker at his most overpowering with the frigid inhumanity of the original 1990.
He went from American Badass to Big Evil.
Undertaker, except without the zombie powers and brother love and all that sort of thing. During this time, he would also hold a rare singles title that wasn't a top belt, the Hardcore Championship, while also famously brutalizing Maven after a stunning Royal Rumble elimination in 2000.
One of the greatest chair shots that I've ever seen and heard. Oof. And also one of the greatest, most shocking upset eliminations in Royal Rumble history.
2002. Well done for winning Tough Enough, Maven. Are you okay? In March of 2002, the streak reached double digits as The Undertaker punished Ric Flair in a bloody street fight at WrestleMania 18 before finishing off the Nature Boy with the tombstone that was actually rarely seen during this time. Undertaker would then set his sights back on the world title shortly thereafter and became the first man to win the belt after WWE got the F out in May 2002. Coincidentally, he would vanquish the man he'd beaten for the gold more than a decade earlier, Hulk Hogan, with the best chokeslam of all time.
Obvious sarcasm is obvious.
Undertaker would become a de facto babyface shortly thereafter, warring with the likes of Brock Lesnar and even Vince McMahon before the next major change in his career. A twisted Kane helped bury his brother.
Let me just say before he finishes up the American Badass Big Evil Undertaker, I didn't mind this version of Undertaker. I don't understand. I literally do not understand why everybody hated this version of Undertaker. I don't know why. Was it out of the realm of what was normal, what we usually saw out of him? Yes. But was the change necessary? I'd like to think so. It was a great way to evolve Undertaker. I like to compare, even though Undertaker as the dead man wasn't getting annoying, it wasn't getting annoying or stale, but it kind of needed to change. It needed to change because we had seen the dead man for what, 9 years at that point, pretty much. Yeah, almost 9 years. I'd say 8.5 years. For 8.5 years we had known Undertaker as the dead man. So the American Badass, I had no real problem with it. I had no problem with it whatsoever. Now the Big Evil portion of him, where he randomly turned heel and beat the living shit out of JR, I just thought that was unnecessary. That was extremely random and uncalled for. Where Undertaker just looked at JR and said, you think you're better than me? I was just like, wait, what? That made no, you know, that was as confusing as this past fall when Daniel Bryan and AJ Styles started feuding, where AJ Styles kept giving credit to Daniel Bryan as being one of the best wrestlers in the world, and Bryan would come out and constantly say, keep my name out of your mouth. Like, what? I'm complimenting you. What? You know, like, it made no sense. Like, and even the heel turn made no sense, even though it's been really good, but still, that whole thing made no sense. I remember it was a SmackDown where Paul Heyman just kept mentioning Daniel Bryan, and then AJ mentions him, and then Bryan comes out and goes, keep my name out your mouth. What? Like, you know, it was like, that was as stupid as Undertaker's heel turn into Big Evil was. But I digress. ABA, Big Evil, I liked it. I enjoyed it. I don't get all the hate. I believe that it was, you could argue that it was Undertaker at his best, at one of, like, it was one of the best points, and it was definitely a highlight of his career. You know, I mean, we're still talking about it today, so there had to have been some good done with that gimmick. I liked it. Brought on more normal, human, realistic side of Undertaker, which a lot of fans at that point wanted anyway, you know. And I know that they would definitely want it today, because you put that original Dead Man Undertaker in 2019, it wouldn't work. But you put ABA Big Evil Undertaker in 2019 and it works. It's gold.
Live at the 2003 Survivor Series, a moment that would mark the end of Biker Taker as we knew him. In the months after, Kane would be haunted by warning signs that indicated that an older version of The Undertaker was coming after him. WrestleMania 20 inside Madison Square Garden was the day that the dead walked once again, as Paul Bearer and a horde of druids heralded Undertaker's return to the dark side. Revenge over Kane was had, and the hellish phenom was back in the game, conjuring up old memories as he slayed fearful giants one after another. Undertaker would also avoid having his legend killed by Randy Orton, throughout a sometimes awesome, sometimes hokey 2005 feud. But this Phenom 2.0, even hovering around...
It was over, though.
His 40th birthday was no nostalgia act. He would challenge for world titles in matches that showcased his...
This match right here, Taker and Kurt Angle, you can make a claim, you could stake a claim that should have been match of the year for 2006. Look, I love Shawn Michaels, I think he's the GOAT, but him and Vince did not deserve match of the year for 2006 by Pro Wrestling Illustrated for WrestleMania 22. It didn't. It wasn't a great match. It was a really good match, even though Shawn was delivering 90 to 95% of the offense. It was still a really good match, you know, but it wasn't Shawn's best match, and it wasn't even Vince's best match. So, you know, I like to think that PWI gave that match of the year mainly for Vince instead of Shawn. I don't think that award was really for Shawn. I think that award was for Vince, as in a way of saying thank you for being the businessman that you are, that you've become, being the success that you have become, building this, this wrestling conglomerate, this wrestling empire, giving us all of these great feuds and memories and classic moments and matches and pay-per-view events and Raws and SmackDowns and all of that. I think it was more of like a lifetime achievement award for Vince, more than anything.
Often underrated wrestling ability. He fell short against Kurt Angle in a real thriller at the 2006 No Way Out pay-per-view, but would make good on later WrestleMania opportunities, defeating Batista and Edge at WrestleMania 23 and 24 respectively. In doing so, he was also amassing more world championships to his impressive collection. Shortly thereafter, Undertaker's appearances began to grow a little bit rarer, and as the decade of the 2000s came to a close, the part-time Undertaker began to take over. The Undertaker that began making minimal appearances was no less anticipated, nor would his higher level performances be diminishing anytime soon. Make no mistake about it, the dead man could still go. This was made apparent at WrestleMania 25 in his native Houston, Texas, when the 44-year-old dead man outlasted fellow Texan Shawn Michaels in an epic half-hour
Don't forget to mention, Jack, both men were 44. No, actually, correction. Shawn... No, they were both 44. Excuse me, my bad. They were both 44 at that point. Shawn's birthday had passed, and Taker's birthday had passed as well. They were both just turned 44. And they went out there and delivered the greatest, still to this day, the greatest WrestleMania match of all time.
Struggle that earned global acclaim, and again is also considered one of the greatest matches in WWE history. Remember before when I said that Mankind may have been Undertaker's greatest opponent ever? HBK might have a...
Mankind was Undertaker's greatest opponent ever by 96. Not by 2009 or 2010.
Word or two to say about that. 1 year later, after ending his 7th and final world title reign, Undertaker beat Michaels in a streak versus career match at WrestleMania 26 that just about equaled its predecessor in terms of quality. In doing so, Undertaker improved to a staggering 80 at WrestleMania, while Michaels bid wrestling a tearful farewell. These matches with Shawn established WrestleMania tradition, the streak as a title worth challenging for in itself. Where one clickster failed after betting the farm, another would give it a go as Triple H came within an eyelash of knocking Undertaker off at WrestleMania 27, although he would be more decisively trounced a year later inside Hell.
This right here is when they both should have retired. And it's not even a doubt. They both should have retired after this. Both Undertaker and Triple H. Because they both have gotten progressively worse since. To the point where I don't even want to see either one of them wrestle in the ring anymore at this point. Undertaker should have ended his career still having the streak. He should have been the only one in the history of professional wrestling to leave the sport with some sort of streak still intact. Andre didn't get to do it. You know? Goldberg didn't get to do it. Asuka is not going to get to do it. Charlotte, in terms of her pay-per-view streak, didn't get to do it. But Taker could have been that guy to leave still holding some streak. But nope. He just had to keep going after this one. And it was the ending was just so perfect. End of an era. Yet we still got both of them still wrestling every year. So much for end of an era.
And a cell at WrestleMania 28, the end of an era.
People were not really pissed off about the end of an era, but were so outraged about Twice in a Lifetime, quote unquote, so-called Twice in a Lifetime. I was more pissed off about end of an era than I was Cena Rock 2.
2013, an iconoclastic CM Punk stepped up to the plate, only to have his arrogance and disrespect crushed in yet another Undertaker show stealer at WrestleMania. And by now, the streak had blossomed to 21-0. And then, we all know what comes next. It happened. On April 6th...
This was the second time Undertaker should have retired.
2014, before 75,000 stunned fans inside the Superdome, the Undertaker by the third F5 of Brock Lesnar. To this day, and for years to follow, paralyzing realization will continue to be felt residually from the gallery of...
There was shocked. There was nobody who was not shocked. I mean, there's nobody that wasn't shocked by that outcome. We were all shocked.
Fans. Everything made this moment so memorable and so heartbreaking, from Paul Heyman's incredulous freakout to the 21-1 graphic on the Jumbotron. It seemed as though this really was the end of The Undertaker, having fought for 23 plus years to protect that smudgeless sheen of his entire existence, only to...
And it should have been.
Finally slip against the beast incarnate. The applause and the chants of "Thank you, Taker" were fully genuine, a deserved ovation for one of WWE's all-time greats, however bittersweet the moment as a whole. But despite that, Undertaker would still press on, still showing his face on WrestleMania Sunday year after year, seemingly forever in perpetuity as a Mania attraction. Bray Wyatt bit the dust at Mania 31, and Shane McMahon's efforts were for naught at 32, and he jumped off the cell, and it was really scary. In between, after warring once more with Lesnar inside a brutal Hell in a Cell clash, Undertaker commemorated 25 years in WWE with a match at the 2015 Survivor Series, teaming with Kane to polish off the Wyatt family. Since then, Undertaker lost a faux curtain call to Roman Reigns at Mania 30.
This was the third time. This was the third time that Undertaker should have retired. And it was just too perfect at this point. Even though Roman got insane massive heat, all for the wrong reasons. But still, this should have been it. The fact that he even came back last year is... I don't know. This is the same man that in an interview in 2002 literally said, "I do not want to be one of these washed up has-been guys still trying to hang on to their prime. I don't want to be deep into my 40s, into my 50s, still wrestling, trying to relive my glory days. I don't want to be that guy." He said that in 2002 when he was, what, 37? He was 37 when he said that. And now he's, what, almost 54? And we're still talking about a potential Undertaker WrestleMania match. I mean, I respect Undertaker, but damn, man, like, damn, when is he gonna retire? Seriously, when? Cause I'm not into Undertaker anymore. I'm not, and I haven't been for the last, I'd say, 3 years now. I have not cared about an Undertaker match, let alone a WrestleMania Undertaker match.
33, before popping up once more at 34 to polish off John Cena in, let's be honest, a glorified squash match. It was a glorified squash match, but it was really exciting at the same time, wasn't it? If
you have to have glorified squash matches at that point in your career, you're too old. You're too old.
Now in his mid-50s, The Undertaker truly has nothing more to prove, though that statement has been...
He hasn't had anything to prove in... He hasn't had anything to prove in like 4 years. Okay.
True for well over a decade, in all fairness. His legacy in WWE is an incomparable one. His status as one of the all-time greats, unassailable. Through the many changes that WWE has undergone in the past 3 decades, from ever-changing rosters to shifts in content and tone, there was Mark Calloway, WWE's Dark Knight, throughout the thick and thin of it all. His career in professional wrestling could never be duplicated, in large part because no other man could have done justice to a role like The Undertaker. So that is the captivating career of...
Alright, so that was Jack the Jobber given a career retrospective of The Undertaker. This was really good. I enjoyed this. I agree, Undertaker set the standard. He set the bar so high. He's definitely in my top 10 in WWE. Sadly, he's not in my top 10 of all-time pro wrestlers because there have been so many other guys that have made greater impacts than he has outside of the States, overseas. And there are also certain guys that knew when the hell to retire and tried not to go past their prime. But regardless, he's a legend, well respected. arguably the most respected out of everybody. And yeah, Jack said it very poignantly. There'll never be another Undertaker. That will never be duplicated. The longevity. That's what stands out the most, is that the longevity. The fact that he lasted this long. Not even lasted this long in the wrestling business, but lasted this long in the WWE. It is very, very difficult, very hard to do that. So, I'm out.